Welcome to another PureRead audiobook. It's wonderful to have you with us. Before we get started, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. Supporting us in this simple and easy way ensures we can continue adding more delightful audiobooks for your listening enjoyment. The following story is copyrighted PureRead Limited, the home of books you can trust. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Snow White Taming the Stubborn Duke, Regency Romance by McColl. Chapter 1, To Tame a Duke. Your sister isn't good enough for my cousin, and you, of all people, should see that, were the words that kept repeating themselves in Tamara Whiting's ears as she walked up to the large manor for the second time in less than a week. She was responding to a summons from the Grand Master himself. Tessa was so busy sewing beads and sequins onto her wedding gown that she hadn't noticed her slipping out of the cottage. Even though Lord Arthur Channing, the Duke of Pentonville, and on whose estate they lived, had declared that he wouldn't allow his newly found cousin to marry Tessa, the girl didn't lose hope. Day by day, Tessa kept preparing for a wedding that Tamara knew might never happen if she didn't do something drastic to change Arthur's mind. He was such a snob, and once again he'd sent for her as if she was one of his servants. Edward Gillen, now Lord Edward the Duke of Wendell, had returned to England a few months ago, injured in searching for his family. His search led him to the Duke of Pentonville's estate, and it so happened that they were first cousins. While Tamara had been happy that Edward, whom she'd come to love as a brother, had found his relatives, she was even happier when he fell in love with her sister. But now Arthur Channing, the Duke of Pentonville, stood in the way of their love. Tessa had even run away from home for a few days, and just returned about a week ago when Edward found and brought her back. They were so deeply in love that Edward was even threatening to reject his grandfather's title if he and Tessa weren't allowed to get married. It was these latest events that had Arthur sent for her once again. "Your Grace," she said as she was shown into his study by his stiff butler. "Miss Tamara, I thought we had an agreement." She raised her eyebrows at him, and he didn't know why he felt a little chastised. "We did. I asked you to make your sister give up her love for my cousin. Even you have to admit that theirs is an odd relationship and not likely to work. The girl ran away and my cousin thought I had something to do with it, and it strained relations between us. Apart from the fact that we're poor and don't hold any titles, what else makes you think those two wouldn't suit as a couple?" "Isn't that enough?" "Oh, really?" Arthur had dealt with very sophisticated socialites, both nobility and gentry, and yet none of them had ever affected him as much as this chit of a girl. Tamara was everything he didn't like in a woman. For one, she was very bold and spoke back at him, unlike what his perception of a good woman should be. She didn't stand to ceremony and would speak her mind regardless of who she was addressing. Not that she was disrespectful or anything, it was just that her boldness unnerved him. "Do you realize who you're talking to?" "My mother's employer, the Grand Duke of Pentonville." Her voice was soft but her tone mocking, and her eyes flashed at him. "Careful, young lady, before you cross a line that would get you into trouble." Tamara also decided that she was getting too angry to be rational, and like he said, she might cross a line that would land her in trouble. So she stood up, curtsied, and asked to leave. "I need to help Tessa at home with some work in the house. I hope you'll think about what I said and take things more seriously than you are." "May I ask you something, Your Grace?" "Sure, go ahead." "Have you ever been in love? I don't mean just fleeting emotions, but true and deep love." He waved a dismissive hand. "That kind of nonsense is for idle people who have nothing better to do with their time than to just sit around and dream." "So you don't believe in love?" "Not what people are parading around and singing about all the time, confessing undying love to each other, gazing into each other's eyes and declaring unending affection," he chuckled. "That kind of madness only belongs in fairy tale and isn't for the sane and rational." "You're really cynical. Did someone hurt you and cause you to take such a wrong view on love?" He shook his head. "I don't allow anyone to have that kind of control over me, so no. No woman has ever broken my heart, and I would never let them. It's just that I've seen quite a number of friends claiming to be in love and things ended badly for them. That's not something I want to deal with. Neither do I want my cousin to end up disillusioned about life. The best thing is to have an arranged marriage with someone of the same social standing. Such a union may not be based on what you call love, but there's mutual respect and understanding, and it works for so many people." Tamara shook her head at the cynicism in his tone. "Aren't you just the slightest bit curious about what it would feel like to fall in love, be in love? Like I said, leave that madness to poets and fairy tales. Face life with reality is what I believe in. One day love is going to strike you full force in the face, and I'd like to hear what you will say about it then." That will probably happen when the place they call hell freezes over. Chapter 2. Finding a Way Out. That man makes me so angry. Tamara made a sound that caused her sister to look at her in surprise. I could just scream. Which man, and why? That Duke of Pentonville. Arthur. Who else? Tessa hid a smile at her sister's outrage. Are you sure you're not overreacting to anything that Arthur said? How can you be so calm when that man is the one standing between you and your love? Tessa shrugged. What will be, will be. I don't waste time getting angry at things that I have no control over. What I handle I do so, but leave the rest to God. I can't believe that you're not raging at the man. Like I said, it's a waste of time to do so. I believe that with time, Arthur will come around and let Edward and I be together, but in the meantime I'll keep preparing and hoping that it will be soon. But you're another matter altogether, Tessa smiled. Are you sure there's nothing else bothering you with regards to Arthur? How do you mean, It seems like most of your sentences these days are filled with Arthur this, Arthur that, like you're trying to keep remembering his name. I don't do that, Tamara protested weakly, even though she knew that her sister was telling the truth. She seemed to be thinking so much about Arthur, and it made her angry that he had that effect on her. Stop changing the subject when it's all about you. Okay then, dear sister, what has Arthur the Duke done this time to irk you? He had the audacity to call me up to the manor and tell me that I needed to make sure that you and Edward don't carry on with your relationship. He said that... Not his actual words, but the implication was there. I asked him if he'd never been in love. Why? Because the only people who behave the way he's doing are those who've been badly hurt in the past. Well, has he? No, the man is just a natural cynic when it comes to matters of the heart. I think his heart is made of stone, though I would like to see it bleed. He says love is all nonsense and for idlers and dreamers. One day he'll fall in love with someone and I hope I'll be there to tell him. I told you so, she grinned mischievously. Oh, to see his face when some woman scorns him and breaks his stony heart. Or perhaps are you hoping that he'll fall in love with you and then the two of you can then live happily ever after? Not a chance of that happening before hell freezes over. His words and not mine, she added when she saw the look on her sister's face. Besides, what about my acting career, which is important to me? One day soon, I'll be leaving for London to join the theatre and become famous. Will that make you happy for the rest of your life? It will, she said forcefully, as if trying to convince herself of the fact, but from the look on her sister's face, she knew she wasn't succeeding. If that makes you sleep better at night, tell yourself that. Tessa. Honestly, Tamara, anyone can see that you're crazy about Arthur and keep hoping that he will notice you. No chance of that ever happening because he's a world-class snob. Our worlds will never meet, and besides that, she struck up a dramatic pose. I'm an actress, the best in the whole wide world. If you say so. Tamara was unable to sleep that night because she was thinking about Arthur, the way the corners of his eyes crinkled when he smiled, or how his silver-grey eyes seemed to bore into her very soul when he looked at her. She longed to see him look at her the way Edward did her sister. That the two were very much in love was evident even though these days Edward spent a lot of time in Northumberland. He was working hard to put things in order in his duchy and, like he always said, he had to get things ready for Tessa. She sighed and turned over in bed, careful not to wake Tessa, who was snoring softly in the other bed. If she didn't stop thinking about Arthur, she might blurt out her secret to him or someone who would go and tell him. At least she could trust Tessa to keep her confidences. Long after Tamara had left, Arthur still sat in his study, wondering why he allowed himself to get so affected by the young lady. Each time he had words with her, she left him feeling rather foolish, as if she was judging him. She was the kind of woman who men like him avoided, men who were looking for gentle and submissive wives. His grandmother and mother had been the perfect wives, but sometimes he wondered if they were really happy. Sure, he'd seen them smile and laugh most of their lives, but now that he thought about it, could he say that they'd been blissfully happy? He'd seen the way Tessa lit up whenever Edward was around and admitted that he'd never seen his mother do that when his father was around. Then he shook his head to dispel his dismal thoughts. Tamara Whiting now had him thinking about silly stuff like romance and love. He needed to find himself a woman to help him forget about Tamara and her foolish notions. Some lady from a noble family who would be submissive and never argue with him, the exact opposite of Tamara. But why didn't the thought give him any joy? Chapter 3. Enter the Lady. It took Tamara all of 3 days to come up with the perfect plan to get Arthur off his high horse, and he needed someone's help. When is Edward coming back from Northumberland? She asked her sister. Why? There's some information I need from him regarding Paris. She didn't want her sister becoming suspicious about anything she was about to do. You know that for a long time I've desired to visit that beautiful city, and that's why I'm really serious about learning French. Well, you have to wait for a few more days. He said he'd be gone for about 10 days and only 6 have passed so far. All right then, she said with a smile, but was inwardly groaning. The thought had come to her as she read Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice's, where Portia disguised herself as a man and assumed the role of a lawyer's apprentice and saved Basinia's friend, Antonia, in court. But Tamara wasn't going to assume the role of a man, but of a young, very gentle woman, just the kind that would attract Arthur Channing. She was going to do her best to get him so confused that when she finally revealed who she was, he'd be left reeling and feeling really foolish. But she first had to try the disguise out on her own family to see if it would pass. Choosing a day when she knew Edward was around and he had taken Tessa riding and her parents were working, she carefully donned her wig and a new gown that she'd bought. She used the face paints she'd purchased with the money she earned from working at the manor. By the time she was done disguising herself, she had to smile at her new face in the mirror. She looked like a very fragile and delicate woman who was also very shy. She walked up to the manor and knocked on the front door. It was opened by her own mother and she nearly giggled. "Good afternoon, young lady. I'm sorry the butler couldn't get the door. May I help you?" Her mother didn't recognise her, and she felt bolder. "I'm here to deliver an invitation card to Lord Arthur Channing for a ball I'm throwing at my current residence." She spoke really softly and her fan half covering her face. "I'll see that he gets it." Then her mother looked beyond her shoulder. "Did you walk here?" "No, ma'am. I rode but left my horse a little way off. It seems such a nice day and walking does me a lot of good." "May I please invite you in for some refreshment before you leave? Sorry that I got the door because the butler is feeling out of sorts. The poor man suffers from arthritis and it's acting up right now." "Thank you, ma'am, but I must decline your generous and kind offer today. Perhaps another time when I come calling I'll enjoy partaking of the refreshments you have to offer. Please tell the Duke that Emily Dubois will be honoured to have him present at her ball." "Very well then, Miss Emily. I'll make sure the Duke gets your card and message." Tamara held back her laughter until she was well out of sight of the manor, then doubled over. This disguise would work because her own mother had stood a few feet from her but hadn't recognised her. Then a cold look entered her eyes. Arthur Channing had chosen the wrong woman to annoy and she was going to play her part to the best of her ability, if it was the last thing she would ever do. He deserved to be knocked off his high horse. Arthur turned the card over in his hands, a frown marring his handsome features. Emily Dubois had given her address as Lady Otway's estate. He knew that the Countess lived in London almost permanently ever since losing her husband 2 years ago. But she usually let her manor out to guests who wanted to enjoy Cumbria and its coastline, so he wasn't surprised. Still, anyone who could afford to stay at Lady Otway's manor had to have really deep pockets, for the woman charged a tidy sum for that. He was curious about this young lady and decided that he would attend the ball to satisfy his curiosity. According to Hannah Whiting, she was a very delicate and gentle person, soft-spoken and seemingly highly educated. She also seemed to have a slight French accent, but his cook couldn't be too sure. He nodded. Yes, he would attend Emily Dubois's ball because he was very interested in finding out who she was. What's more, it was a masked ball, which made him wonder if the young woman wasn't trying to hide in plain sight. Chapter 4. The Ball. Arthur found himself staring at the young woman who was seated alone on one of the plush couches in the middle of the room, provided for that purpose. There weren't too many people present, and it was obvious that this was an exclusive and very private event. It wasn't the conventional ball, but who was he to judge? He could hear soft music in the background and wondered that no one was dancing. Waiters moved around offering drinks and hors d'oeuvres, but he waved one away. Time for that later because his interest lay elsewhere right now. He'd read the invitation from Miss Emily Dubois more than once and out of curiosity decided to attend, more so because it was a masked ball. Though not grand like a number of the ones he'd attended in London and even at the manor, it nevertheless appealed to his critical eye. Modestly wealthy was the first thought that came into his mind as he took in her expensive gown and accessories. She also looked very regal sitting there receiving her guests. He really wanted to find out more about his hostess. Raising his eyes to look around, Arthur was surprised to see Edward and Tessa, easily recognizing them, and they hailed him from across the room. "I didn't know that you knew Miss Dubois," he told them after dispensing with greetings. "I was surprised when she delivered an invitation to the manor, and it's obvious that she's new in these parts." He pulled his own mask off. "These things are really a bother, and I don't understand why people throw masked balls." "Miss Dubois is new and has to be careful about who she intermingles with. I know everyone here because I helped her come up with a list of those she could invite, but there are spies among us and I advised her that for the moment she should also don a mask, Edward said. I'd have really liked to see the face of my hostess, but what you say makes sense. You seem to know her very well. Miss Dubois is the daughter of a friend of my mother's, so naturally, as soon as she arrived in Cumbria, asked us to come and visit her, Edward said. Her mother is a widow, and the two have been keeping a low profile in Paris. When Mrs. Dubois was diagnosed with a serious chest infection, they decided to come to England and spend time at the seaside, and since Cumbria has better weather than Paris, my mother suggested it to them. I don't see anyone who resembles her mother anywhere. Arthur looked around the room. Neither do I see Tamara here. Why didn't she come? It was Tessa who responded. Because she wasn't invited for, she wouldn't fit in. Edward told me that Miss Dubois is actually Lady Amelia Gerard, the daughter of a count in France, but in these unstable political times she prefers to use her mother's maiden name, which is Dubois. Her father was killed just a few months ago and she's still in mourning. She and her mother had to hide and live among peasants and it left a bad taste in her mouth. Don't ever tell her this, but Edward says they're mild snobs and only socialise among their peers. Tessa looked around, caught her sister's eye and looked away again. Miss Emily only invited exclusive guests, as you can see. I was only invited because Edward insisted on it, even though I'm not a member of any noble family. The jab hit home, but Arthur ignored it and turned to his cousin. I'd like a formal introduction to Miss Dubois, if you can do that for me, Edward. Sure, right away. He took Tessa's hand and led the way. But please put your mask back on so as not to intimidate her. Arthur did as bid, even though he felt a little foolish doing so. Lady Emily, Edward bowed slightly while Tessa curtsied. Arthur bowed also and took the gloved hand that was proffered, kissing it on the back. My lady, this is my cousin, Lord Arthur Channing, the Duke of Pentonville. Lord Channing, this is Lady Emily, but she prefers to go by the name Miss Dubois. Tamara wanted to giggle when she saw how impressed Arthur was with the idea that she had a title. If only he knew, but she smiled demurely, eyes downcast because she didn't want him to recognize her. He was a shrewd man, and if he suspected anything, then it would be all over. So she stood up and curtsied. Your Grace, she had practised until she had a near-perfect French accent. Yes, mon plaisir. Dear Lady Emily, Edward said, you're supposed to be practising your English. Remember we talked about this. Besides, you speak our language so well and should be proud and show off your prowess. Why, she cleared her throat daintily. Pardon moi, monseigneur. Ah, forgive me, please, I'll try to speak English now. And she gave him a gentle smile. He wished he could tear her mask off her face and behold it, but propriety dictated that he be on his best behaviour. Though the mask only covered the upper half of her face, her well-painted lips drew him, and he found himself unable to gaze away. Something about her brought out strange feelings within him that he couldn't explain. It was as though she had mesmerized him, and he soon forgot about Edward and Tessa, who quietly slipped away, amused expressions on their faces. Miss Dubois, please accept my sincere condolences on the recent passing of your father, Count Gerard. Miss Teresa just told me the sad news and I'm very sorry for your loss. Mercy, Tamara sat down and bowed her head. I'm sorry it's so recent and still hurts so much, she said softly. I didn't mean to cause you any distress. Is there anything I can do to make you feel better? Tamara nodded. Can we walk in the arbour? Yes, my lady. He held his hand out and raised her to her feet, keeping her close while glaring threateningly at any man who even glanced their way. He led her out of one of the double doors leading to the lawn that was well lit, and to one of the seats provided for those who would need it. Are you feeling any better now? Thank you, she sat down, actually feeling weak and didn't have to pretend. Being this close to Arthur was affecting her more than she cared, and she didn't want to give herself away. The fact that he was paying attention to her meant that she had caught his eye and interest, and she needed to hold it till her revenge was complete. Looking too eager would only push him away because Lord Arthur Channing was the kind of man who liked to be in control. I'm rather tired, she murmured, closing her eyes. Can I get you anything to drink? A glass of Madeira, please, she said, and watched while he went to do as bid. When he returned a short while later, she begged to be excused because she could feel a headache coming on. He had no other choice than to escort her back into the house, the drink she asked for forgotten, and watched as she climbed the stairs to her bedchamber. He turned to find Edward and Tessa watching him with a lot of interest. What? Well, if I didn't know any better, I'd say that the young lady has had quite an effect on you, Arthur. Will you be seeing her again? He shrugged. I don't know because we didn't talk about it. She had a headache and asked to leave, so he twisted his lips. Who will now continue hosting this fun fair? He'd lost any further interest and just wanted to go back home and think about Miss Emily Dubois. He couldn't understand why a simple and brief meeting should elicit such strong feelings of protectiveness in him. He'd felt her sadness and wanted to be there to comfort her through her pain. "I think I need to take my leave now." "Most people are leaving anyway," Edward said. "I understand Lady Somerville is also hosting a ball for the coming out of her 2 nieces later this evening. Will you be going there too?" "I don't think so." He waved at them and left. Chapter 5. Smitten Duke. It was the day after the masked ball, and the sisters were giggling in their bedroom when they heard horse hooves outside. "I wonder who that is," Tamara said, scrambling off her bed. "It's Edward, and he seems to be in a hurry." Tessa, who'd been standing at the window, called out, "Shall we go and see what the matter is?" They found Edward pacing their parents' small living room. His eyes lit up as soon as they settled on Tessa, but he addressed Tamara. "That was splendid acting, but I'm afraid we may have a problem." "What?" The 2 girls looked at him in surprise. "My cousin is no doubt smitten by the Lady Emily Gerard or Miss Emily Dubois, and can't stop talking about her. He wants me to go there and deliver a message for her to visit him at the manor." "That would put the whole plot in jeopardy," Tamara agreed. "He has to meet her on her own grounds where she can easily slip away if things seem like they're getting out of hand. The only problem is that I can't spend a lot of time at Lady Otway's manor. We only got it for yesterday's ball, but it's quite isolated and lonely that I don't want to spend more time there." "I may have a solution to that," Edward said. "Remember, I told you both that my mother was on her way to come and visit me. I'd thought to take her up to Northumberland, but then decided that she should stay here in Pentonville. Arthur would offer her accommodation at the manor, but my mother has some terrible memories of the place. Why don't we take out a short lease on Lady Otway's manor, then Tamara can be my mother's companion? It would fit in with the story we gave Arthur about the widow and her daughter. Since my cousin has never seen my mother and there are no paintings of her at the manor, he has no idea who she is and will fill her in on the plot." Tessa clapped happily. "That's brilliant! When does your mother arrive?" "In 2 days' time, which is why I'd like for Tamara to ask your parents for their permission and let them know that you'll be working for the widow who's coming to live on Lady Otway's estate." "That might just work," Tamara said. "I'll do it right away and then we can go and prepare the place for your mother. Luckily, Lady Otway has 2 permanent staff and the place is in good condition. It was actually Geoffrey the butler, whose daughter Sue is my friend, who allowed me to use the place yesterday. I hope he doesn't get in to use the place yesterday. Any kind of trouble." "Arthur says Lady Otway usually rents or leases the place out to whoever needs it since she's sort of permanently based in London these days. We just need to speak to Geoffrey and find out who the caretaker is and make the necessary arrangements." He shook his head. "How did you manage to get such a crowd come?" "Easy. Many of them are just ordinary folk who jumped at the chance of living in a make-believe world even for a moment. Besides that, it was a masked ball and there was no chance anyone recognizing the other. The orchestra was a small up-and-coming group who offer their services for a small fee." "Neatly executed, but I nearly had a stroke when Arthur came in. He has a really keen eye and I feared that he would want to speak with the other guests. But luckily, from the moment he was shown in, his eyes were glued to you, or should I say, Miss Emily Dubois, and he left as soon as you went upstairs. I don't think he suspected anything. Now shall we move ahead with the next step of our plan? Let me handle the lease and get everything else ready." "That would be nice," Tamara said. "She loved being in the manor and seeing all the beautiful things on display. We should do it as soon as possible then." "Good, meanwhile. I'll go and keep my cousin busy until Miss Emily Dubois is ready to receive him again." When Mrs. Gillen arrived 2 days later, the 3 of them were waiting for her at the Otway Manor. "Ladies, meet my mother. Maman, these are the beautiful ladies I've been telling you about. Please meet Tessa and Tamara. It's Tamara who will be staying here with you for the 2 or 3 weeks that you'll be around." Madame Eugenia Gillen looked around the living room with a lot of interest. This was a beautiful house. Her English was perfect, though with a faint trace of French accent, and Tamara relaxed. She'd harboured fears of dealing with a French woman who knew very little or no English at all. Her own French was passable, but not with a native of the language. "Thank you for finding it for me and also providing a companion for me." "Would you like to rest now and walk later, Mother?" "I rested enough because it wasn't a hurried journey. Now, sit down and tell me all that has been happening to you since you left Paris." Edward filled her in on everything that had happened. "And as I told you in my letter, this is Tessa and I'd like to marry her because I love her so much. But my cousin is against our relationship because she's not titled." Eugenia smiled sadly. "You're just as rebellious as your father was years ago. He was supposed to marry some young woman from Northumberland because of some agreement between their grandparents or something like that. But we met in London, fell in love, and when he brought me back to his family for an introduction, his parents gave him an ultimatum. Marry Lady Isabel, as she was called then, or be cut off from the family. My darling Paul chose me over his family and we left for Paris soon after. Was that why he never talked about them ever? Yes, and also we agreed that you would never know about your family holding a title. We wanted you to live a normal life, and that might have happened had this war not broken out and you got into trouble. Your father's family were snobs, and from what I can see still are, and it hurt to see my husband missing them terribly but not able to return home. You see, your grandmother reached out to him a few times, but his answer was always the same. He would only return to England if they accepted me, but they never did. She shook her head. Now it turns out that you're supposed to marry someone else too. Yes, and she's Lady Isabel's niece. Her name is June, and Arthur thinks that for me to fully be accepted by the people of Wendell I should marry her. What do you feel? Mother, I love Tessa, and if losing the title means being with her, then so be it. I wanted to refuse, but Tessa told me to hold on for a little while. Somehow, she has faith that Arthur will soon change his mind and give us his full support. I don't see what the trouble is all about. If you're a duke in your own right, why should you pay attention to what your cousin has to say? Here in England, family ties are very strong, and it was Tessa who asked me not to break them again. Arthur may be a difficult person to deal with, but he's all the family I have left now here in England. What if he never gives his consent for you to marry? Then I will walk away like Papa did. I believe he was offered the duchy in Northumberland if he married Isabel, but he walked away. That's what he never told me, but it now all makes sense. Whatever you decide to do, I'll support you fully. It hurts to be rejected all because of titles, and yet love matters too. My Paul and I had 25 wonderful years together, and I know he would never have been happy with the woman chosen for him by his family. If you're convinced beyond any doubt that Tessa here is the love of your life, your soulmate, then follow your heart. That's why we need your help, Mother. You see, we started a plot where Tamara disguised herself as the daughter of a French widow just to see if my cousin would take an interest in her. If he had merely given her a passing glance, we would have abandoned the whole idea altogether. As it is, he's thoroughly smitten after only one meeting and has been begging me to make a way for him with the girl whose name we chose to be Emily Dubois. She's the daughter of a count who was killed a year ago and so is still in mourning. That's the story we're going with. Also, her mother is supposed to join her shortly. Sounds like a simple and yet truthful enough story. One thing about playing the part of someone else, don't ever do it, Eugenia advised. Did your cousin see Tamara's face? No, it was a masked ball and everyone had a mask on. That's something we need to think about if they're to meet during the day, Edward said. That's really simple. Because you already told the Duke that you're in mourning, we'll maintain that and capitalize on it. I'll be one of those very strict French matronly mothers who insists on all formalities being upheld. She turned and smiled at Tamara, who decided that she liked the woman very much. It was clear that Edward got his pleasant disposition from his mother. You're still in mourning, so you'll have to wear a veil at all times until 1 year is over. That's what your family dictates, Eugenia said with laughter in her eyes. Luckily, I brought over enough veils to cover the next 2 weeks, so you better do all you can to ensure that you have this man eating out of your hand within that time, or else all this will have been for nothing. Mamma Tamara is an aspiring actress, and she carried herself perfectly. With the veils on, it shouldn't be difficult to bring my cousin to his knees. In the short time that I've known him, Arthur is the kind of man who is kept interested by elusiveness. If he can easily understand and analyze you, then he will soon lose interest. The fact that you hid behind a mask is what got him really interested. You're an enigma to him, and that's the angle you need to use to your advantage. Very well then, Tamara grinned, liking the challenge. She was having a lot of fun, and now with a delightful accomplice. All should go according to plan. Chapter 6. Properly Chastised. Arthur couldn't believe that Lady Emily wasn't available to see him. He instead met her mother, and while he was amazed at her beauty and youthfulness, he also sensed a steely demeanour and knew he had to tread carefully. This wasn't just an ordinary woman, and for the first time in his life felt unsure of himself. Still, he was here to see Emily and cleared his throat. After greeting him, Lady Eugenia quickly pulled her black veil back over her face to show that she was in mourning. My daughter loved her father very much. Eugenia dabbed delicately at her eyes from under the veil. The pain of loss is sometimes too much to bear, so you must pardon her for not being willing to meet with you. She had a terrible night and I had to stay up comforting her, so the poor lamb is now sleeping. I'm really sorry to hear that. Is there anything I can do to make things better for her? Eugenia tilted her veiled head slightly. Your calling card indicates that you're the Duke of Pentonville. It was more of a statement than a question, and Arthur found himself nodding. Why are you interested in my daughter? Forgive me for being very... She waved her hands. What do you English call forward? But I have to look out for my child's interests. What is your purpose for seeking her out? Arthur felt the collar of his shirt tightening around his neck, and longed to be anywhere else but here. In all sincerity, he had no idea why he was interested in a woman who he'd only met once, and even then, she'd had a mask on, so he couldn't very well say her beauty had enraptured him. What was it about Emily Dubois that had him all riled up and acting like the fool? I truly don't understand it, my lady. I only met your daughter briefly at the ball she threw here a few days ago. Emily threw a ball while we're in mourning? Arthur felt badly for having put Emily in trouble. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get Lady Emily into trouble. My daughter is very young and impressionable, and for her to go against the family propriety and entertain before a year is over deeply disturbs me. I shall have some very strong words with her on this issue. Please, my lady, let me bear this mistake upon my head. Were you the one who asked my daughter to throw the ball then? Was she acting under your influence? Arthur didn't know how to respond to that question, so he kept silent. I don't want you or anyone making excuses for my daughter's lack of proper manners. In my family, when we lose a person, we have to remain in mourning for 1 full year, during which we can't entertain or even attend any functions, regardless of how close we may be to the host. For her to have gone against this means she's being influenced by someone. Arthur felt the piercing glance through the veil. It seems that I made a mistake of trusting my friend's son. He said he would look out for Emily, but all that has happened is that he now has her celebrating while she should be mourning her father's death. Coming to England was a great mistake, and as soon as I can make the necessary arrangements, I'm taking my daughter back to France. In any case, my chest feels better now, and I don't think Napoleon will ever be a threat again. Arthur couldn't imagine that he would not see Emily again. Could fate be this cruel to him, to lead him to find a woman he was interested in only to have her snatched from him too soon? My lady, what can I do to make things right? Please don't make any decisions in haste. Eugenia stood up, signifying that the visit had come to an end, and Arthur was forced to do the same. I'd like to say that it was a pleasure meeting you, Lord Channing, but given what I now know— She shook her head, picking up the small bell and ringing it. A male servant appeared. Gervase, please show Lord Channing out. Arthur had nothing else to do but leave, and he did so with a heavy heart. Once they were sure Arthur had left and wouldn't be returning, the 4 of them had a hearty laugh, even though Tamara felt sorry for him. That was the perfect possessive parent act, and it will give Arthur a few days of discomfort. If I know my cousin, he'll be back tomorrow or even sooner, bearing gifts. Well, Mrs. Gillan has set the pace for the rest of the 2 weeks. Now that Arthur knows that my mother is a very strict person, he'll be careful about how he acts around me, and my secret will remain safe. This now makes it possible for me to reject any invitations he may bring up. Chapter 7. Mellowing the Heart. Where have you been? Were the first words out of Arthur's mouth as soon as Edward casually strolled into the drawing room. I've been waiting for you. Arthur, my dear brother, I too have a duchy to run, and it isn't proper for me to keep running here and there when I should be putting things right back at home. What's the problem now? I unknowingly put Miss Emily into trouble with her mother, and the woman was really enraged. Really? Edward feigned innocence. May I ask what happened? I went to visit Emily and by mistake mentioned the ball held a few days ago. Her mother was so angry that she would do that while the family is still in mourning. I wasn't even allowed to see Emily and was shown out by a servant. I'm sorry to hear that, but that lady seems to be a great snob, much like someone I know. Edward chuckled at the glare his cousin threw him. So what are you going to do about this then? I have to find a way of reaching Emily and asking her to see me. Behind her mother's back. Are you insane, Arthur? I know that I only got to spend a short evening with Emily, but I can't get her out of my mind, Edward. What am I going to do? Having lived among the French nearly all my life, I can tell you that they're what my mother likes to say. They are highly volatile. Something small can easily set them off, and that will cause you to lose ground with them. I suggest that you wait a day or two before returning to see Emily. By that time her mother will have calmed down. Then Edward rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Did Lady Gerard tell you not to visit her daughter again? No, but she wasn't welcoming either. That's just how she is, but in a day or two. Take her some flowers or candies and be careful not to overstep yourself. Remember that she's in mourning and prone to mood swings. Be sensitive and you might just win the day. Thank you for your advice, dear cousin. Edward's advice worked, and 2 days later, Arthur sent a card requesting to be allowed to visit. He asked for a reply to be sent back with his messenger, and when it turned out to be positive, wasted no time in visiting. This time he found mother and daughter working over an intricate piece of embroidery. Your Grace, both women stood up and curtsied, and he bowed to them. They wore similar white veils which he felt were better than the black mourning ones. He just hoped the change in colour meant they were ready to entertain. Thank you for having me. He held out a tin of soft-coloured candies and was pleased when Emily first consulted with her mother before receiving them. I hope you don't mind my coming to visit you when you're obviously busy. Still you came, Lady Eugenia remarked dryly, and Arthur turned red. Mamma, Emily protested mildly. Lady Eugenia stood up, her back stiff, and moved to sit at the window. There was an awkward moment while Arthur debated on whether to sit down or to leave, seeing as his hostess wasn't all that cordial. But unlike the last time, she didn't summon one of the servants to see him out, and he took that to be a good sign. Please sit down, Emily invited, and he did so, careful to keep a respectful distance between them, much as he wanted to reach out and hold her hand. He was keenly aware of the subtle glances that her mother was casting in their direction. Thank you. He looked at her, wishing he could see her face through the veil. It was very lacy and completely kept her face concealed. I hope you're feeling much better after the other day.
Thank you for being concerned. I feel much better. May we offer you anything to drink?
No, I just came to ask your mother for permission to take you out in my carriage and show you around Cumbria. Eugenia overheard the conversation and immediately rattled off a stream of French sentences. From the way Emily shrank back, Arthur knew he'd made a terrible mistake. She finally fell silent and he looked at Emily's bowed head. I'm sorry if I said anything displeased your mother. Please don't ask me to leave the house again, at least not in my mother's hearing, she responded in a low voice. We're in mourning and it's not proper for us to be seen to be enjoying ourselves. I'll keep that in mind. The rest of the visit passed without incident, and by the time Arthur left, he felt that he'd recovered the ground he'd lost with Lady Eugenia. Well, that man is smitten enough, dear girl. Eugenia turned to Tamara after Arthur's carriage drove away. Are you sure revenge is all you have on your mind? Tamara decided to be truthful to the woman who was being kind to her. I really don't know, but please don't let Edward or Tessa know this. It's clear that you're in love, but now you've introduced another character into your whole dramatic life, and getting rid of her is going to prove difficult. According to that young man, he's falling in love with Emily Dubois. How will you handle that when the time comes? Tamara shook her head. I honestly have no idea. Chapter 8. Change of Heart and Mind. Why the long face, Your Grace? Arthur was startled out of his deep thoughts by Tamara's appearance. You look like someone whipped your beloved horse or something. Miss Tamara, good morning. What are you doing here? He was in his study and hadn't wanted anyone to disturb him. Still, seeing Tamara cheered him up slightly. My mother sent me to ask if you need anything, Your Grace. He did, but he wasn't about to tell her that he missed Emily. How could he have fallen so deeply in love with the elusive young woman? She was perfect for him, and he'd even taken her a ring the day before. Her mother seemed pleased with the whole idea, and they'd talked about the wedding ceremony at length. But this morning, when he went to see them, was surprised to find the house all locked up. One of the servants told him that Lady Eugenia and her daughter had had to leave for Paris urgently, and no, he wasn't sure that they would be back soon, if ever. Arthur had sat down on the seat, staring at the now shut-up house for close to an hour, not believing that he would never see Emily again. The servant practically ignored him as he went about his duties, and in the end he'd been forced to return home. I'm sorry, he remembered that Tamara was present and she saw the suffering in his eyes. It should have cheered her up, but she felt terrible at having deceived him. Still, it was nice knowing that he was fallible after all, and not the demigod he'd made himself out to be. I just have a lot on my mind. Tamara decided to be bold enough and ask, would it perhaps have something to do with Lady Emily Dubois? Do you know her? Tamara nodded. Tessa told me all about her. It's a pity that she and her mother had to return so urgently to Paris. What did you hear? Something about her father's estate being in jeopardy. Tamara shrugged, but her eyes were keenly watching Arthur. She might need me. Do you think Edward knows their address? He shot to his feet and came round the desk. Then he laughed at himself. Of course Edward does. I need to go to her and see if there's any way in which I can help. He was surprised when Tamara threw her head back and laughed. What is it? Why would you follow a woman all the way to Paris, someone you've known for less than a month? Arthur blushed. Oh dear, how the mighty have fallen. So you've finally fallen in love and now don't think that it's for weak people, dreamers and fools? I never said that, he muttered gruffly. You implied it. How does it feel to love someone who doesn't care about your feelings and can just leave without saying goodbye? Has hell now frozen over? Remember, those were your words and not mine. We were engaged. It was all in your mind, Your Grace. What if the woman was just being polite to you because you were insistent? She said she loved me and I believed her. The French are a difficult people to deal with, and you should know, seeing as we've just come out of a needless war. You fell in love with the illusion of a perfect woman and she turned out to be just ordinary like the rest of us, Tamara taunted. Don't say that. How else would you explain her sudden disappearance, and also given the fact that you never saw her face at all? Before you ask me how I knew, servants talk. Those people working for Lady Eugenia could barely keep their mouths shut because, according to them, you were making a fool of yourself over a woman who had no interest in you. That's a lie. Is it? Tamara knew she'd said enough and needed to take her leave. I'm sorry, Your Grace. Forgive me for overstepping my bounds. Would you send your sister to me? Why? You made it clear you don't want her anywhere near your cousin. Your hurtful words in the past wounded her, and seeing the kind of mood you are in right now, I don't want my sister hurting more. Arthur raised an anguished face to Tamara. Would you believe me when I say that I'm sorry for all that? Prove it. That's what I want to do, but because I know you'll keep nagging me, I want to tell Tessa that she and Edward can get married if they still want to. Tamara swallowed her whoop of joy, choosing instead to show Arthur a very calm face. Your Grace, please don't be jesting with my sister's heart, for I'll never forgive you if that's your intent. Love hurts terribly, he whispered huskily, and now that I know how it feels, I can never be that cruel. My cousin is in Northumberland, but I've sent a messenger to ask him to come so I can bless them. Let someone have their heart's desire, for then maybe the Lord will be merciful and take this pain away from mine. Thank you very much, Your Grace. Tamara curtsied and hurried out of the study to give her sister the good news. Edward and Tessa wasted no time in getting married just in case Arthur changed his mind. It was a small and very private ceremony attended only by the couple, the Duke, and the bride's parents and sister. Edward's mother was conspicuously absent because they still hadn't told him about Emily Dubois and felt it might not be the right time to do so. Nothing was going to stand in the way of the ceremony, not if they could help it. We intend to immediately leave for Northumberland, where we'll prepare a more elaborate ceremony, Edward announced. Thank you for this, Arthur. It's the least that I could do, seeing as I stood in the way of your happiness for so long. Please forgive me. His eyes were sad, and Tamara felt it deeply. Much later, after her sister and her new husband had left for Northumberland, Tamara thought about Arthur's pain and suffering and realized that she was in anguish alongside him. That's what love did to a person. It made them feel the pain of their beloved, and she decided to put him out of his misery. She was going to tell him the whole truth so he would know that Emily Dubois wasn't a real person, but a character she'd made up to get back at him. Because she had no idea how he would react, she chose to leave him a note, and one for her parents too. The only person she shared her plans with was her twin. She had to travel to her sister's new home in Bellington, Northumberland, to share her plans. Eugenia Gillan was in residence there and really glad to see her. After sharing some news, the older lady left them to talk, so she told her sister what she intended to do. Are you sure this is the right thing to do, Tamara? Tessa asked. What else can I do? I can't live there seeing him suffering so much, and yet it was all an illusion, a lie. I have to tell him the truth, but I'm not brave enough to stay around and face the music, so I took Mrs. Dubois' advice and will be leaving for London tomorrow. Please see that this ring and letter get to him. It was his grandmother's ring and very precious to him, so make sure nothing happens to it. You can trust me, but how will we manage in London? Edward's mother gave me the contact information of a good friend of hers. Mrs. Vivian Hill was an aspiring actress when she fell in love with the wrong man who took her to Paris. Seeing that the relationship was going nowhere, she put herself through drama school there and now takes care of budding and upcoming actresses. Will you be able to afford her fees? Mrs. Gillan said she would help me, and when I'm in a position to do so, will then pay her back. This is the chance of a lifetime, Tessa, but I know our parents will really be hurt when I leave. Please tell them not to hate me. I have to follow my heart and see where it takes me, and I promise that I will be a good girl and never bring shame to them, and you also. I trust you. When Arthur saw the ring and note that Tessa delivered to him personally, he knew that something was terribly wrong. He was afraid of reading the note because he thought Emily might be dead or hurt or worse, had truly rejected him. Go ahead and read it. Tessa made herself comfortable. Her husband was out in the stable taking care of his horses, and she felt confident enough to face Arthur on her own. He no longer intimidated her as much now that she knew he had a heart of flesh, like any other human being. He did so, and she saw his face turning white. Why? Was all he asked when he was done, looking at her with stricken eyes. How could Tamara play with my emotions like this? Because, Your Grace, you gave her no other choice. Feeling quite confident are we now, Tessa? It's Lady Teresa Gillan for you, dear cousin. Edward walked into the study. You're the snob, and you'll treat my wife with the deference due to her. You can no longer threaten us, and I think what Tamara did is quite commendable, seeing as you've finally been knocked off your high horse. Shut up! Arthur roared, but the two weren't intimidated. How would you feel if someone made a fool of you, took what you thought was true and turned it into something very ugly? How could I not have known that it was Tamara all this while, and your mother helped her too? Yes, because the same thing you were trying to do to Tessa and me is what your grandparents did to my father and mother. They wouldn't accept that the son of a duke could fall in love with an ordinary French girl, so they rejected her and him by extension. Well, just like my father, I was quite prepared to abandon everything for the woman I love. My parents had one of the most stable and happy marriages, and that's what Tessa and I have started. You're a love destroyer, Arthur, and I, for one, think you deserve everything you got. Tessa felt a little sorry for her new cousin-in-law. Have you stopped to think that perhaps you so easily fell in love with Emily Dubois because she was the exact opposite of my sister? What? Tessa nodded. You were in love with my sister, but she was everything you didn't want in a woman. For one, she's not a noblewoman. Then she's not a noblewoman. Then she's poor, bold and courageous, a strong person who isn't afraid to take life head-on. Her very nature threatens all you perceive to be manly, and so in denial, you went out to find someone who was the exact opposite of Tamara. All this, dear cousin-in-law, is because you're in love with Tamara but don't want to face up to it. Arthur collapsed in his chair, leaned his head back on the rest and closed his eyes. Could what Tessa said be true? Was he in love with Tamara but didn't know how to handle her, so he chose the easier way out? He'd prided himself on being a rational person, but the events of the past few weeks said otherwise. He was just as weak and easily prone to deceit as any other person. It humbled him, and at that moment he felt completely broken. Where can I find Tamara? I need to speak with her and tell her how I feel. Chapter 9. In Deep Despair. You're not good enough for my sister, Tessa told Arthur. You may be a duke and have all the money in the world, but you don't know the last thing or even the first about love. She shook her head. I feel really sorry for you because you're going to live the rest of your life wondering how things might have been with Tamara. Tessa, please have mercy on me. I haven't been the best of people, and that's something I'm willing to admit. I know that people perceive me to be a snob. He saw her eyebrows go up and changed his statement. I am a snob. There, I've said it. Good. The first step to solving a problem is acknowledging that there's one, and now that we all know that you're a snob, let's move on from here. You aren't going to make this easy for me, are you? Not a chance, Tessa grinned at him. How does it feel to finally be in love and acknowledge that it isn't for the idlers, foolish and dreamers, or that love belongs in fairy tales and that hell isn't going to freeze over because you of all the people in the world are in love? Tamara told you that, he stated, turning quite red. I said a lot of things out of foolishness, and I'm ashamed. But please have mercy on me and tell me where your sister is. I now admit that I love her so much, and I can't imagine not having her in my life. Tessa wanted so badly to tell Arthur where Tamara was, but she needed to know just how serious he was about her. Well, the last time I heard, she'd met someone wherever she was, and from the way she was, and from the way she was, and from the way she was going on and on about him in her letter, I believe there's a good match there. Arthur wanted to rant and rave in frustration, but then he remembered that he'd brought this all on himself. By telling Tamara that she wasn't of his class and showing her through his actions, he'd actually driven her away. She deserved to have a man who would love her for herself, and not because she was titled or had money. This was his fault, and the best thing he could do would be to walk away and leave Tamara alone to find happiness. Tessa was watching Arthur keenly, and when she saw the resigned look on his face, had her answer. Still, she waited to hear what he had to say. Tamara deserves to be happy, and she can only find that with a man who truly appreciates who she is. He shook his head. I showed her that I believed she wasn't worthy by what I said to her so many times. If there's a chance that Tamara can be happy with someone else, I wish her well. It's killing me to have to say this, but I have to accept that I've lost the only woman that I will probably ever love. His voice broke and he cleared his throat. Tessa decided to put him out of his misery. Arthur, Tamara doesn't have anyone else in her life, she said quietly. I needed to know that yours wasn't just a case of infatuation, and the fact that you're willing to step aside and let my sister find happiness tells me that you love her. She joined the Shakespearean Theatre in London because she'd like to become an actress. No wonder that she was so good at deceiving me. Arthur shook his head, half speaking to himself. At the time, I thought that I had found the perfect woman, sweet and gentle, yet it was all an illusion. He looked up with grateful eyes. Thank you, thank you. You better not hurt my sister any more than you've already done, or you'll have to answer to me. Yes, Lady Gillen. He bowed slightly and she giggled. I must say being a duchess requires some getting used to. You're a natural, and I'm so glad that my cousin never gave up on his love for you, no matter how many obstacles I put in his way. He turned to his cousin, who'd silently listened to the interchange. You're a better man than I am, Edward, and you've earned my highest respect. Please make Tessa very happy.
That, dear cousin, is my mission in life.
Thank you both for helping me see the truth. May your lives be filled with so much joy and happiness, even though it's taken this long to get there. The waiting was worth it. Just be gentle and patient with my sister. I promise you that, Tessa.
Lady Teresa, for you, sir.
Really, Edward, his wife exclaimed, and the Arthur chuckled when he saw his cousin's sheepish look. These Whiting twins had brought two great men to their knees, and neither was complaining. Chapter 10. To find his Duchess. She was sensational, and as the audience gave her a standing ovation, Arthur felt pride intermingled with jealousy rip through his heart. Long after the actors and actresses had cleared the stage, he stood in the private box looking down at the now empty stage, wishing he could fly and leap over, so as to get to her in a hurry.
That new actress is just what this dismal theatre needed, a man said from behind him as the audience poured out of the theatre. I wonder who she is.
The name is Tamara, but she goes by Tame, his friend said, and yes, she was really good. I'm going to make sure that I watch all the plays that she's in. It's quite a difference from the jaded actresses who can't seem to understand that their heydays are over. Fresh blood is what any decent theatre needs. Arthur half listened to the conversations going on around him, and the one name that was on everyone's lips was Tamara's. The play she had been acting in was Romeo and Juliet, and she had brought out the latter character so well that he'd seen a few women around him wipe their eyes from time to time. His Tamara, he thought, and then shook his head.
Oh, Arthur, I didn't realise that you also like Shakespeare. Lady Anita Kentmere approached him as he stood in the lobby of the theatre, and he groaned inwardly. He should have left immediately, but something had held him back. Anita was one of London's worst gossips and prided herself on being a huge critic of all plays. That she was here on opening night to watch the play meant she was going to write a review, and he hoped she would be kind to Tamara. What did you think of the new actress playing Juliet?
I thought she did a good job, he replied nonchalantly, waiting to see her reaction, which wasn't long in coming. The woman turned her powdered face fully to him, and her eyes were blazing.
Did a good job. That young lady will go far in theatre, she said. Even though she's acting on stage for the first time, I can see that she's quite promising.
Then she dismissed him with a wave of her hand, clearly offended that he didn't see Tamara as greatly talented. Of course, he did, but past experience had showed him that one had to be very careful when dealing with Lady Kentmere. He was glad that she felt so strongly about Tamara, and he was sure she would write a good review about her. Then he sighed. What was he doing here? Clearly this was Tamara's world, and with her current victory, would be in many more plays, and her life would change greatly. He wasn't a part of that world, and just like he'd told Tessa, he wanted her to be happy above all else. So he turned to leave, then decided that he should at least see her for the last time, and if she let him, would tell her how he felt. Tamara thought that the standing ovation and wild applause would cheer her up. It did, but just for a few minutes, and then she felt hollow. As she received flowers and tins of candy from the enraptured audience and high praise from fellow thespians, she smiled with her lips, but her heart was in despair. She called on all her acting powers to help her through the next few minutes, but then it was time to return to her small dressing room. Luckily, one had been allocated for her personal use, and she found Vivian just clearing it up and putting all garments back on hangers.
You were such a sensation, Tamara.
Thank you, Vivian. I wouldn't be here without you, and this success belongs as much to you as to me. She flopped down onto the soft couch that had been provided for her to use whenever she needed to rest. Vivian stopped what she was doing and drew closer to her young protégé, sitting down beside her on the couch.
There's a lot of sadness in your eyes, dear child. Weren't you happy with your performance?
It's not about the acting. It's all about my real life, Vivian. Tamara shook her head. I can't shake this sadness from my heart. That's because you can't easily get over a broken heart, my love. What you did was run away from it, but at some point you'll have to face your past, deal with it, and then only will you be able to go forward. It's so hard being alone after all the acting. Out there on stage I can forget all my sorrows for a moment, but once all that is gone, all I feel is emptiness within. No wonder that it's called acting, she finished sadly. Before Vivian could respond, there was a soft knock at the door. She stood up to go and answer it.
Probably another fan bringing more flowers or candies, she commented. Don't eat too much candy, for it's bad for your teeth and will make you fat.
Tamara smiled. I have no intentions of ruining my beautiful teeth. The children at St. Hannah's Orphanage will have a wonderful time, for that's where it's all going from here. You're a special girl, do you know that? So, should I let the fan in? Tamara shook her head. Right now, all I want is to be left alone. Please deal with whoever it is and have them go away.
I wouldn't want them to see me at my worst because it might be a reporter who would write a terrible review.
Very well then, Vivian smiled as she walked to the door. Tamara leaned back against the couch and closed her eyes tiredly. She felt like weeping because she knew that no matter how many times she went on stage, her heart would never be fully in it. She owed the theatre company her full attention, but it was so hard with her heart still beating for Arthur. At some point during the play, she thought she saw someone like him up in one of the private boxes, but then dismissed it as pure imagination. It was clearly just a figment of her imagination, for the faces weren't visible in the dim lights. A snob like Arthur wouldn't come to a romantic play like this one. Then she realized that it was too quiet in the dressing room.
"Vivian!"
she called out without opening her eyes at first.
When silence greeted her summons, she sat up and thought she was dreaming.
Arthur managed to convince the middle-aged woman who opened the door to Tamara's dressing room that he had no ill intentions. What gave him room, however, was when he produced a letter from Tessa. Her twin sister, Lady Teresa Gillan, sent me with this letter. I came for the play and then decided to come backstage to personally see that she gets this note. Very well then, but please be as quiet as you can be. Miss Tamara is really exhausted after doing 4 shows today. I'll be very quick. When he came into the dressing room and saw the love of his life lying on the couch, he at first thought she was asleep and loathed to wake her up, simply stood there and drank in the sight of her beautiful face. He was glad to note that she used very little makeup to change her appearance, for he felt that her face could hold his own. When she opened her eyes and stared at him as if one in a dream, he stood still. Am I dreaming? He heard her murmur. Tamara, I'm real, and this is no dream. Your Grace, she wanted to get off the couch and do obeisance as was proper, but he held his hand out. You're exhausted, and please call me Arthur. He walked to the chair next to the couch. May I please sit down before my feet give way? Tamara looked at his face and saw nervousness in his eyes, which greatly surprised her. Thank you for coming, but what are you doing here? I came to watch the play and also to see you. Lady Tessa sends her warmest greetings to you. Thank you, so I wasn't imagining that I saw you in one of the special boxes. It was me, and I thought you were a sensation. You're natural at all this, and I met Lady Anita Kentmere. At her startled look, he realized that she knew the woman. You seem to know her. Not that well, but from what the other actors and actresses say, she can make or break someone's acting career. She thought you were exceptionally good. At some point before, Tamara might have been excited about the good review from one of London's harshest theatre critics, but now it didn't matter. She was excited to see Arthur, but he was probably just here to congratulate her on her fine acting. That's nice to hear. Tamara, I didn't come here to talk about critics in the play. I actually came to see you. Why? Because, dear girl, I can't live without you. What? He nodded. I'm in love with you, and before you say anything, I want you to know that it's for real and not infatuation with an illusion as you told me before. Since your departure, I've had a lot of time to think and came to a bad conclusion, which is, I've been a fool all this time. Tamara, you're a wonderful woman, and I'm miserable without you. This is worse than when I thought I'd lost the fictitious Lady Emily Dubois. At some point, my staff thought I was going mad and had to call Edward and Tessa to come. I'm sorry. She was stunned at his revelation and wanted to pinch herself to make sure she wasn't dreaming. Don't be. I deserve all that because of being the world's greatest fool. I can't live without you, don't want to live without you, and I know that you're making a life out here for yourself. I'm not telling you this for any reason other than I just wanted to see you one more time and be here for you. An actress's work is really hard, and I'm prepared to support your career for as far as you want to go. I love you and want you to be so happy that if you want, I can buy you your own theatre. Tamara giggled softly, and Arthur felt hope stirring up within him. You're a really funny man, Arthur. Why would you want to do all that for me? Because I love you, and supporting your career will bring me closer to you. That's if you'll let me. She held out a hand, and he took it and kissed her palm. Of course, you silly man. I want you to be close to me. You mean that? I've been in love with you for the longest time, ever since I first saw you when I was 15, and at the time I thought it was all infatuation. But it's only grown deeper with each passing year, though I resigned myself to the fact that you could never love someone like me. That's all my fault for being such a snob, he said quietly, while rejoicing inwardly that Tamara loved him. I'm really sorry for making your life miserable. That's the reason I chose to come to London and become an actress. You see, out there on stage, it's easy for me to pretend as I get into character. Being someone else enabled me not to think about my own pain. Oh, Tamara, it breaks my heart to know that I've been the cause of your pain. Can you ever forgive me? Very easily because I'm in love with you. Whatever you decide to do, I will fully support you. Theatre is changing and gone are the days when people thought negatively about actresses. Once we're married. She held up a hand to interrupt him. I don't remember you asking me to marry you, she said cheekily. An oversight that can quickly be remedied, he took both hands in his and looked deep into her eyes. Tamara Whiting, would you be so kind as to put this foolish man out of his misery and accept to be his wife? He once again produced his grandmother's ring. This rightfully belongs to you and not Emily Dubois. Will you wear my ring, bear with me in marriage, and later bear little nobles and ladies for me? When put like that, it makes a lot of sense to me. What kind of a subject would I be not to oblige my lord? Cheeky as always, he smiled gently, and she felt like she was floating on a beautiful cloud. Tomorrow, will you be my wife, my duchess, my lover, friend, confidant, and eventually mother to my children? Yes, yes, and yes to all those. If you wish to continue acting, I'll simply open up our London house so you can operate from there, and whenever you're on stage, I'll do the necessary to be there for every one of your plays. He was surprised when she shook her head. This is all acting, and I don't think I want to do it anymore. It was my way of coping with all the emotions that loving you brought. But you're here now, and I want nothing more than to be your wife, Arthur. Are you sure? I don't ever want you to feel that I ended your acting career. It's only just beginning. And besides, no one will really miss me because I haven't really broken through. There are many other actresses who will nicely fill the role of Juliet. So what are you saying, my love? That I want you to take me back home to Pentonville, ask my father for my hand in marriage, and then make me your duchess. My duty is to my husband, our children to come, and the loyal subjects of Cumbria. Epilogue. Mother, I always knew that our twins were special. Brian Whiting held his wife's hand as they sat together on their small veranda watching the sun setting. It's very strange and yet exciting that both Tamara and Teresa are duchesses. This is grace beyond what I would ever have imagined or hoped for. These girls have done us so proud, Father. Hannah turned to her husband. Are you happy, Brian? He nodded, gently squeezing her hand. More than you can ever imagine. The first time you told me you were expecting our baby, I was so happy, and then we received double joy. You've been a good wife and mother, and even though I don't say it often, I love you from the bottom of my heart. I know it, dear husband. She leaned on his shoulder, sighing in contentment. They would miss their daughters, but Tamara was only a few yards away, while Tessa didn't live too far, that they wouldn't see her often enough. Yes, they'd received abundant grace, and now all they had to do was pray for their children and wait to receive their grandchildren. Are you happy, my darling? Arthur reclined on the bed, watching his wife as she read one of the plays that she was writing. Is this the kind of life you envision for yourself? Yes, my love. She stood up and walked back to the bed, sitting down and taking his hand. Thank you for starting a theatre school right here in our village. We have many budding actors and actresses, and besides, it will keep the little ones out of trouble. Nothing is too good for my Duchess. My parents would have been proud of you. I really hope so, and I hope to continue honouring the great men and women who went before us. I have no doubt that you'll do that. Now how about making the Duke of Pentonville a very happy man? Much obliged, Your Grace, much obliged.
The end. Thank you for listening. Here at PureRead, we aim to serve you, our dear readers and listeners, with good, clean Christian stories. You can be assured that any PureRead book you pick up will not only be hugely enjoyable but free of any objectionable content. We are deeply thankful to you for choosing our books. Your support means that we can continue to provide stories like the one you have just listened to. Please like and subscribe to our channel. That way you'll be the first to hear when new stories arrive for your enjoyment. To browse our range of clean and wholesome titles, go to pureread.com. God bless you and thank you again for listening.